Can people hear me? It's usually a benefit of these sessions, although some people say I'm better when muted. Anybody want to confirm they can hear me? No? Am I speaking to a void? To avoid what? Okay, well, I'll assume you can hear me. I've seen a yes in the chat. That's good then. That gives me a great deal of confidence. That's one of the things I don't like about these virtual sessions, where you don't have a real audience to play to. Yeah, that was an old picture, sorry. And here's my COVID lockdown hair, and today's T-shirt is Geeks Rule. I bought a whole load of T-shirts last year ready to present, and then all this COVID stuff came in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take you a whirlwind tour with lots of demonstrations of the various, or some of the various things we can automate in Citrix virtual apps and desktops, so specifically around that area rather than sort of NetScaler or XenServer or anything like that. So without further ado, let's just do a quick sort of placement of why we want to do it. Once it's done, it's usually much quicker and more reliable. Because, of course, human error is the biggest problem with a lot of things. Take out the humans, then we're probably okay. And sort of repeatability. And it allows us to do things via scheduled tasks. So rather than having to do something at 2 o'clock in the morning, which for some people's great because they might get paid overtime. For a lot of us, it's a case of, I really can't be bothered. So we can use built-in Windows scheduled tasks to do a lot of this stuff. And then use email and other methods of notifications if you want. Hook it into Slack or, dare I say, Teams and those sorts of things, or text messages. There's lots of ways of putting notifications out. And there's a lot of stuff out there ready-made. So you might say, well, I'm not really a PowerShell scripty person, where somebody like myself does PowerShell pretty much every day, 7 days a week, sometimes 8 days a week. And how do you know whether something's good or not? And that's the problem, of course. Because I might put a script out there and I'll go, yeah, I've tested it, it's all really good. And you say, well, it's from Guy, it must be really good and very well tested. And then I might just have missed something or not quite considered your particular version or something that's out there. And you run it in your production environment and you could break 4,000 user sessions and that sort of thing. So sanity check it. Even if you don't understand what everything's doing, you can probably look in there to see if it's trying to copy large amounts of documents up to a cloud or encrypt your files. And if you've got the luxury of a test environment, test it there first. What can we automate? Well, the builds themselves. Back in the day when I was doing Citrix builds in the 1990s, when machines came with 2 gig of RAM and 4 processors, if you were very lucky, then we did everything manually. Then we started to automate it a bit. Of course, there's so many different ways you can automate the build itself. Again, I'm not going to cover that here. What I will be talking about is creating sort of new endpoints for Citrix MCS and PVS. Good old reboot schedules. Obviously there's a lot built into CVAD itself, but they don't always suit everybody. We've got slightly different criteria, so you can roll your own. Good old updates, because we like to update our machines, don't we? Well, we don't necessarily like to, but it's probably a good idea. That dirty word, backups, so we can copy various bits of data into various whatever formats we want, rather than just taking, or you can take machine snapshots. But it just depends what you need to back up. But again, the more you automate it, great, but just test the recovery works before you actually come to rely on it and find your backup doesn't actually work at all. I do quite a lot of these for customers, particularly when, let's say, we find a bug in the product. One a couple of years ago was to do with printing, and the problem we had was that the spooler would basically die, but it couldn't be restarted, couldn't be killed, so we couldn't use that machine again. So again, something just periodically check the machines. If one of them had shown this particular problem by an event log entry, then we put it into maintenance mode, message the users. Next time we check, every 15 minutes or so, if we haven't got the users, then we reboot it and take it out of maintenance mode. So again, saves somebody having to do that manually. When you've got hundreds of machines, then it's much easier to do it that way. I'm just going to turn my camera off to save a bit of bandwidth and to save my hair from distracting people from the content. One of my scripts on GitHub, where there's sort of 100 scripts or terms with references in the slide deck, which will be available later, as well as the recording. The popular one is for just running a daily health check, let's say at 7:30, and then halfway through the day, just to say what machines have I got, what's maybe not quite right, and just email it out. And again, that came about because a company I used to work for, people were doing that manually. It's like, really? Oh, what a pain. And that's when I look across to see how I'm doing for time and realise I haven't started my PowerShell countdown. So I'm 5 minutes in. So let's change that to a 40-minute. Again, this is all PowerShell, of course. I find it very useful. And we just click run, and then that will start counting down. And the same thing actually uses clocks. And I use this a lot in my testing and things, because I can just hit mark, put a comment in. So I don't have to write on scraps of paper. I can come back to it, and I can export these things as well. Again, another utility on GitHub, but I find that very useful. Also do the NetScaler stuff. I don't do NetScaler stuff. I find networks and storage very boring. I leave that to other people. It's enough on the desktop to keep me busy. And pretty much look to automate anything that's time consuming or error prone or very boring. But if it's worthwhile, if you're doing something manually, once a month and it takes 10 minutes, but again, it's going to take you, let's say, 2 weeks to design, build, test, document it, is it really worth it? Much as I love scripting, I won't always write a script to solve something or to implement something if it's the return on investment in terms of time or money, depending on what it's paid work, isn't worth it. As much as it can be fun. But that's where the community comes in. You can write things, well, I can't really write this at work, this could be fun. Yep, do it, works, great, okay, then share it. That's kind of where I started out. And then you just get distracted by the community and spend all your time doing that stuff. But PowerShell is my life. Okay, so let's actually crack on, or just crack up, and talk about how we can create new MCS endpoint devices with some demos as well, assuming the screen sharing works, of course. Looking across, make sure I've stopped the camera, not the microphone. Although, again, I say some people seem to think I sound better muted. Okay, so creating new MCS is actually very easy. It's kind of all built into Citrix PowerShell, which means literally half a dozen lines and we can create new machines. I mean, we can create a whole Citrix site from the ground up with catalogs and delivery groups and published desktops, all that sort of side of things. There's a lot more to it than you might think. And I've got a script that I haven't quite released yet, because something like that needs a lot of testing. So the idea being that you could dump out your existing site to JSON with everything in it, and then be able to re-import it into let's say a test environment or another environment. But here we're just going to talk about not creating from scratch, but let's say we've got scenarios, we've already got some MCS devices, but suddenly I need another 10 making, for instance. And so what will happen here is, let me just share my screen. If I can remember how to do it, so I'm not very technical. Pick the right screen, looks like that one. And then bring a window across. Hey, right. So here's just, well, this is my jump box. I mean, that's one of the things I've in the slide later on, which I probably won't get to, which is rather than doing these sorts of things on delivery controllers or storefront servers or anything that's got an active role, build yourself a jump box, as in a server OS, so you can get multiple users connected to it, admin users that is, and then install all the necessary PowerShell APIs, SDKs, consoles, etc. So this box has got PVS, console, studio, and it's got a utility I wrote so I can actually fire up Studio against my two different delivery controllers, because one's 1912 LTSR and one's 2103 current release. It's got PVS console, etc., and all the PowerShell commandlets I need. So let's go to this, which actually isn't a script. Read that first line. This again is just stuff that I can use in demos using good old PowerShell ISE. None of this newfangled Visual Studio Code with me. Again, mainly because I do a lot of coding on custom sites and got to code with what's available, which is always ISE. So the first thing we need to do is to actually create new AD accounts. So say we've got already a delivery groups with MCS. So I'm going to use this particular delivery group. Play to machine catalog. So you can see at the moment it's got 6 machines in it. Again, we can view the machines if we wanted to, but again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to bother. And this is the OU where it puts them. So let's create another couple of machines. So the first thing I would do is to copy and paste, or just run that particular line. And this is where we hit the first issue. Because I'm on a jump box, notice I said new accounts. And what we don't do is we see red and then run away screaming, going, PowerShell gave me an error. It's all wrong. Your script's broken. Help. Now, what we do is we actually read the error. Although it's not particularly descriptive, to be fair, in this case, an invalid URL was given for the service. What does that actually mean? All that means here is because I'm on a jump box, it doesn't know what to communicate with. So in this case, it's a delivery controller. So what we do is we give it a admin address. Again, notice as soon as I start typing, it puts it up there, so I can just tab complete. And I've got to point it at a delivery controller, or a load balance entity. Then I've got to think and talk at the same time, which for me is very difficult. So DDC02, that's actually telling it to communicate with that delivery controller. So if you read Citrix documentation, in some places it says you only need to specify this admin address once, and after that it will remember what machine it's talking to. My experience is some of the commandlets, unless you explicitly put this in, won't know what machine, and you'll get to talk to, so you get these errors. So I put it in to every command. But you can use something called splatting, which is a hash table, which basically means you can define it in one place. So if you need to change it or add extra parameters, again, you can do it in one place. So let's do that. Hope that works. The demo gods are looking good today, so I probably jinxed myself. So that's assigned to this variable new accounts, a couple of new accounts. Of course it has, Guy. Prove it. Okay. So we look at it, we can see a successful count. So these are just properties of the objects, and we can see it's created. What it's told me it's going to do is to create these 2 new machines. Now, are those machines free? Yes. So we look in here. My naming scheme, which is GL S19 MCS, and then the numbers. So GLS 19 MCS. You can see the last machines I had in there were 9 and 10. Oh, by the way, hopefully you know about creating toolbars. So the desktop toolbars, you can see your desktop shortcuts, even when you've got Windows on top. And you can even turn off icon display on your desktop, clean desktop, and the desktop menu still works. And then you can also add the admin tools menu direct. So again, I've not had to manually build this. I've literally just created the toolbar, and I've tweeted about that a while ago. So I can bring up all my tools much more easily. So that makes sense. It's going to pick machines 11 and 12. Good. So I've not had to worry about going and finding those machines, finding what's free, etc. So I've got my new accounts. And then I can go ahead and actually make VMs with this line we have here. So again, I'll put that to the clipboard. F8 it if I want, that runs immediate, but then if we need to change the command line, it's easy to do it this way, so Control V. Now I'm running this, I can run this asynchronously or I can run it synchronously. So if you're creating a lot, you might want to run it asynchronously, but then you have to look at the task and wait on the task to be finished. Slightly more complicated, but it can be faster. So in fact, let's go to our, or my vSphere console. So here we can see at the moment, again, there's my existing MCS machines, 9 and 10, so notice we don't have an 11 and no recent tasks. Nothing up my sleeves, although you can't see that. So let's do that. Has that actually given me something in this prov VM task? It has. It's given me a GUID, as in an identifier. Notice down here now we've seen some tasks fire off in vCenter. So there's my reconfigure machines. In fact, I had to create them from scratch. That's the beauty of MCS, of course. Creating them from snapshots, 11 and 12. You can also change the snapshots. I've got a script on GitHub for that as well, so you can automate it if you so desire. So that's created those 2 new machines. Are they in Active Directory yet? Yes, they are. Doing F5 in there. So there's 11 and 12, so it's done all that for you. Next, we have a look at that task itself. So we get the provisioning task. If I just minimize the script for a moment, we'll see all the lovely information it gives us. Main thing is here, status finished, completed, terminating error, and so terminating error, no terminating error. So that's pretty good. So that's what we want. So that has now created those machines. But what it hasn't done is actually put them into the catalog. So if we go to the machine catalog, those are members of, we do view the machines. There's my 9 and 10, but even with a refresh, I have no 11 and 12. So what's going on? But it's created the VMs here in vSphere, and this will work across any hypervisor that you've already configured within CVAD. So that's my vSphere. So now we actually have to add them to the catalogs. So just for convenience, I can get my catalog there, but I don't actually need it. So the main thing here is task details, created virtual machines. So we can see that down here, created virtual machines. So there's my 11 and 12 again. What I'm going to do is for each of those, I'm going to call the Citrix commandlet new broker machine. And the machine name, I have to use a SID, but again, I've got the SID in there. The catalog ID, again, I'm calling get broker catalog, but I could have assigned it to a variable. And I've decided here I'm actually going to set them into maintenance mode. After I'm going to change that. False, I can actually spell false. So then at the end, again, that's why it's kind of a placeholder. It's one of the main things with PowerShell. I did a PowerShell session entitled Writing Robust PowerShell, and one of the key takeaways from that is always check error status of things. So we'll do that. And again, this is a case in point. Notice that failed to connect the back-end server. Why is that? Well, because it hasn't actually remembered what what delivery controller to run this against. So we quickly put that in there. As long as the get broker catalog works, of course, I might have to put it in there. I'll put it in there as well. I love those. Put an address. Get? Good idea. I'm losing the plot. It's got my own initials then. What some people do call me a get. X8DD2. Machine name is no. Well done, guy. So let's switch into troubleshooting mode. See what's gone wrong there. Figure it out in enough time. I'll actually move on. Oh, great. I've lost my task details. Fantastic. So, for some reason, my variable has gone. So I haven't got those machines. So what would have happened? I did all this yesterday, my rehearsal. Of course, it all worked. Yes, of course it did, guy. That would have created the virtual machines in the catalog. So we'd have seen the two machines in the catalog. And once we've got the machines in the catalog, you can simply add them to your desktop group. Desktop group being a delivery group, slight difference in nomenclature between Citrix, API or PowerShell, and what we see in Studio. And we don't actually tell it the specific machines. So here we don't tell it we want to add machines 11 and 12, but that's the same. If you remember back to the Citrix Studio that you get when you say you want to add new machines. You don't pick the machines, you just pick the catalog and say how many machines. And as long as there's that many unassigned machines, it will add them. So that's effectively in 1, 2, 3, 4 steps how I can go from no VMs or no extra VMs to having new VMs within a delivery group ready. And if I set maintenance mode to false, which is the default, then they're actually ready to go once they're powered on. So So almost a demo that worked. Let's move the vSphere out of the way. Yeah, oh, sorry, I've just come back to the chat now, media player. Yeah, all my demos are live, as you can probably tell now. None of this recorded video stuff. So again, the slides just kind of back this up that I've just been showing, so we'll skip through all those. It does work, believe me. And then there's actually a link to a blog post I wrote to Script Runner that goes through that in more detail, and links to a script that will do it as well. So again, the usual sort of thing that, yeah, if you think about it, something you need to do, you think, well, surely somebody's done that already. Then, yeah, they probably have. So it's a case of knowing where to look, which is usually, GitHub or posting one of the forums, somewhere like that. So create a new PVS device. Is that the same guy? No, it's quite different, unfortunately. Whereas PVS is still probably one of my favourite Citrix products, right back from, even before Citrix owned it, when it was called Ardent, if you can remember that far back, some of you. It's a little bit more involved, shall we say. So what do? Well, we don't have that nice, easy mechanism telling Citrix to create the Active Directory account and find out what's free. So we have to do it ourselves. So we can either use the Active Directory module, or you can do it manually, of course. You go and look in your AD and go, oh yes, these are the next 5 machines I'm going to use, earmark them or manually create them, or whatever you would do in your organization. Again, the script that I wrote that will do all this for you. Some of you may have seen me publicise it on Twitter a bit. We'll find all the free machines for you, and if they're not all consecutive, so if machines 10 and 11 and 15 are already used, but 12, 13, 14 aren't, then it will pick out 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, for instance. And cross-check, of course, to VMware or your hypervisor, etc., to make sure they don't exist there. So I'm just going to have a quick drink, non-alcoholic, of course. That's not why I turned my camera off on us. So we can use PowerShell. I use ADSI. Why? Because it means I don't have to rely on the Active Directory module. It's a little bit more perverse, should we say, to use syntax-wise, but again, plenty of examples out there. So we find our new machine names. We actually create the VM within our hypervisor. So again, in this case, is for me in my lab is VMware. So I create the VM there. There isn't the equivalent, again, if you remember back to MCS, we would actually got Citrix to create the VMs for us, and it talked to the hypervisor. No, here what we have to do is create the VMs. So I use a vSphere template that I've got. Again, it's just got my persistent D drive and event logs configured to push there, as well as the overflow cache and page file. We then add it to PVS. So again, we're using the PVS commandlets, which is separate to the CVAD ones. As we'll say later in the slide deck, although I won't get to those slides, you can have them as reference. We get those commandlets for PVS because we've got the PVS console. You can see my on24 screen now. Right, okay. So I stopped sharing, don't I, there? Schoolboy error. Not very good with technology, that's what I said. And yet, I've even got the attendee view in another window. So then I can say, yeah, but I'm also not looking at that either. Yeah, don't get old, folks. Okay, so hopefully we're back to just being able to see that rather than the team chat. Good job I didn't put anything, yes, in the chat. So we now need to add the machines to PVS, which we can do through those PVS commandlets. So we first of all need to create a new device in PVS. So we do that with a new PVS device via its MAC address. So that's the key here. We have to get the MAC address from the VM. So the new VM within VMware PowerShell returns a VM object, and we can call a get network adapter. So that's, again, is a PowerShell a commandlet that will give us the MAC address. So we can feed that into new PVS device saying, hey, here's a new machine name with this particular MAC address. But new PVS device doesn't actually assign us any disks. So we then have to find the disk, the existing PVS disk that we've got in our store, and assign it to that new device. Then we add it to the domain. At least we don't have to add the domain ourselves through the Active Directory PowerShell. As long as you've got it configured correctly in PVS to domain join, then you can just call out PVS Devices domain. That's one saving grace. So I'm just clicking the right place, and then we're back to doing the same sorts of things that we do with MCS. So we call new broker machine, also, except there's a slight complication here in that new broker machine with MCS, we literally just gave it the machine SID, so the name. Here, we actually have to tell it the hypervisor connection UID, as in which particular of my hypervisor connections, if you've got multiple, is it, and what is the UID of the machine itself, which is a bit painful. Again, I'm not going to go into the detail here for the sake of time, but the script that I wrote, all 1,000+ lines of it, to support this and do this, has got that in it. So if you're interested to see how it's done, get hold of that script and pull it apart. And of course, because it's on GitHub, if you think, oh, Guy, you've done this wrong, or you want to make some improvements or add some functionality, that's the beauty of GitHub. Pull request, make changes, push it back to the community, share it with the community. More than happy for people to do that. And then we add it to the delivery group, again, in exactly the same way we did with the MCS. So these last two steps are pretty much the same, other than this complication of the hypervisor. Okay. Sorry, just being sidetracked by a message. Like most blokes, I can't multitask. So I'm not going to demo this as such because it will take too long given all the steps. But if I click on here, again, at the bottom, you see there's a link to a script, a blog post that goes into more detail on all the steps required. And also then there's a script at the bottom hosted by Script Runner that will allow you to do this. And I've had a few of my fellow CTPs test it for me. So as per a lot of my scripts, it takes quite a lot of parameters, most of which you don't need to specify yourself. Let me share my screen, see if I can manage that. Again, this time, just very briefly, I'll show you that. And then bring. No, that didn't work. Oh. No, and it did work, but it was slow, and I've now just cancelled it. Wow, this is going well, isn't it, Guy? You really are a good guy, yes. Let's hope there's no feedback forms. At this point, I'd normally tell a joke, but again, I can't multitask. So let's try to start the screen share again. She'll cry shortly. It's okay. Turn the camera off so you might see the tears. Right then. So, well, here's the MCS one where I say, okay, this isn't the full script, lots of parameter blocks and options and so on. It's all a bit hard-coded. Oh, there's the new PVS device one. Is what is it? Says it's screen sharing. Is it catching up? Oh yes, it is catching up. So I'm not going to go into detail, but we can see right at the top, all the comment block going to help people. There's only a few mandatory parameters, but again, when writing a script, rather than hard code any string or anything in there at all, just make it a parameter. Like we've got an example here. And just give it a default value. So if somebody doesn't specify it, then you can just give it a default, rather than not using the parameter block, and then people are actually having to change the script when they want to customize it for their own use. Pros and cons of both approaches. It's easier perhaps without parameters to use it in a scheduled task, but if you know what you're doing, again, there's a slide later on about putting this into scheduled tasks. So, for instance, if we look for a new VM call that won't search up, this is where we're using PowerCLI to create a new VM from the template that we specified. Again, the template being an argument into the script. Then we, as I said, we get the network adapter, so we can get its MAC address. If it's got multiple NICs, then again, there's a parameter to tell it which network, if you've got a separate PVS network to use. Then we create the new PVS device, as I said. Then we add a disk to it. Notice again lots of error catching, which is quite important to make sure that everything hasn't broken, rather, unlike my presentation, so that we can see that if we've told it to create 10 new virtual machines because I need them in my delivery group, then it has created 10 machines, and there's not been a problem somewhere along the line. A lot of scripts I get in to QA for people or just look at generally, tend to skip on the error handling. Okay, it makes the script a lot longer, but makes it more robust. That's what I'm saying. Is if you're going to automate stuff and give stuff to people in your organisation and say, yeah, I wrote this. So, well, yeah, last time you wrote it, it took you 10 attempts to get it right, and we had full P1 outages because you didn't test it properly. Yeah. So error checking is key to making something reliable when it's important. And here you see we do the add PVS to the domain, then we're adding it to catalogs and so on. But I won't demonstrate that. Okay, let's stop sharing my screen. So that's PVS. So if you want to configure or change settings, potentially in delivery groups or machine catalogs or elsewhere within CVAD, something else we can automate. Let's put all these machines into maintenance mode at whatever time because we're going to patch them or whatever else we want to do. So we can do various things. So as with most PowerShell commandlets, there are get commands and there are set commands. So we can set machines themselves individually, or we can actually set it at the delivery group level. So you can put a whole delivery group into maintenance mode if you want. Or you can disable it, which is actually something you can't do currently, as far as I'm aware. Well, probably not up to later versions in Studio, but you can do in PowerShell. And the advantage being if you set a delivery group to disabled, so enabled $false, then what we're doing is actually meaning it doesn't show in storefront when a user logs on, whereas if it's in maintenance mode, the user will still see that delivery group. And if it's the delivery group itself, which is in maintenance mode, then they get an error when they launch it. So I prefer to disable delivery groups. I'll come back to the questions at the end, if I may. We can also make changes to catalogs. So anything you can do in Studio and more, you can do through PowerShell. So quite often when I'm doing things with tags, for instance, because tags is a nice, powerful feature, I will do it through PowerShell. It's so much easier than trying to navigate around Studio to do that. Then we can start to do some admin stuff if we want. So let's say there's a problem on a particular machine. Maybe I've detected it through a script automatically, through an event log entry or a process, or running or not running. Lots of ways we can detect it. So I've used set broken machine to put the machine itself into maintenance mode. Might be that I then need to ask the user to log off and log back on again, so that they log off and then we'll log back onto a different server in the farm. So I could use something like send broker message, and then either, probably in that case, stop the broker session. I could just left disconnect on there as an example as well. So let's, why is that slide the same title? I've gone back. No, that should be number 2, that's why. So we can look at sessions. Again, what does filter left speed mean? It means, if you're familiar with PowerShell, you can pipe stuff through where object or the question mark, which is alias for where object. But again, don't use that in scripts because it makes them more difficult to understand, particularly for non-PowerShell savvy people. Then the further left we go, the more efficient it is. For instance, if you've got 3,000 concurrent user sessions and you do a get broker session and pipe it through where username equals, it has going to return all 3,000 sessions and pipe it through that where. Whereas if you say get broker session minus username, it will only return that the sessions that match that username. In fact, let's again do a screen share. This is where probably I should have just stuck with a screen share the whole time and used PowerPoint natively. But hindsight's wonderful, isn't it? In fact, the only exact site. So let's get rid of that. Get back over here. So again, here I'm running as I'm running as a domain admin, but I'm not elevated. So my usual test is if I'm running elevated, run the filter driver manager control program. See what file system filter drivers, because if you're not elevated, then you get access denied. So if I do a get broker session, go on, let's get this keyboard text. Well, that's not a lot of use, is it? All that information. Well, we can do things a number of different ways. We can select specific properties. So if I use PowerShell's system history, so I actually go through previous commands there, so we can see there's one I will use in a minute. Sending a broker's message. I can look at a specific machine, so I can say, oh, who's logged on to that particular machine or machine range? Here's where I'm using it. So here's the example of filtering left. So let's see if my user Billy Bob is logged on. That's called Live and Let Die, the Bond film. That's where that user came from. So I'm selecting just a small number of properties. Well, how did I know what properties to select? Well, again, the easy way to do stuff is just do a select start pipe through outgrid view or OGV alias, because that will just show things. Yeah, it's not very busy, my lab at the moment. I've got one user session, which is over here. I get my user Billy Bob on that particular machine. So I set it ready for the demo. So you can see all the properties. So in that select, I can select whatever I'm interested in. A wealth of information. But then I can do things like, just bring this over. Yeah, ready. Let's do a send. So here we go. I can send to, now notice here in that command, I don't need to know what machine they're on. Yeah. So I'm just saying to CVAD, find out what machine or machines, because they're logged on to multiple sessions, this user's logged on to, and send them a message, which then comes out like that. Or what I could do is to pipe that through stop broker session to log them off. Or I could do a get broker session on the machine name. Remember the machine needs to be domain qualified, MCS 01. Get how many were there of those? Screen full of information, just pipe it through measure. I can just pipe it through select username, other things. But then what I could do, of course, is then pipe it through send broker session message and do the same thing. So that message all users on that machine. So again, you can do this as part of automation. You might try and do this through sort of Director or Studio. A lot of the time, particularly large environments, I find it easy to do it through PowerShell. That's why it's somebody who can read, a bit like somebody who can read Matrix code. So what else can we do? Well, we say we can get broken machine, type in the right window. That's always useful, I find. Which is something you might not be aware of, rather than notice. You can tab through arguments to see what's available, what sort of things you can filter on, but you can also use control space, which will actually list everything, and it will warn you when there's over 100. Because there's over 134 parameters that you could give to get broken machine. Makes my script for PVS devices, which has 36, quite small. So I've said yes. So these are all the ones that you've got available. Notice it puts them in alphabetical order. So I could say when the last connection time was, and I could actually use a date range rather than a specific time, all these sorts of things. But notice I'm using the cursor key to go through them. Yeah. So, well, you probably can't see me pressing the cursor key. I've got a camera in my office. Looking around paranoid. I can do all sorts of things from here. So that's how you can discover, as well as, of course, another thing you can do to understand what the commandlets are is to run get help. Then we give it a minus show window. Then it will pop up in a window and give you, all the options, command line, examples, etc. Or it will take mine as online as well, and actually go to a web page as long as you can get to the internet from where you're running that machine. So again, a good way to find out what commands you've got available, but also, what else can I do with sessions? Well, we can use get command for all Citrix modules, and we can say, what are the commands which have got the word session in them? There you go. So those are all the ones which got session in. So some actually to do with that V there, some to do with session recordings, setting various session things. So that's how we can explore a module rather than having to RTFM, as in look at rather boring online documentation. We can sort of second guess that if we want something, it's going to have session into it. Another way we can work out what is going on from a PowerShell perspective is within Studio itself. So if you go to the root of Studio, you'll find there's a PowerShell tab. Now, the problem usually is trying to find something interesting. So there we go. There was some stuff. So you can see at 2:30 2 days ago, it was doing a get broken machine on something. But anyway, if I go and let me go and make a change. So let's go and change. So here you can see some disabled. When I was talking about setting set broker desktop group, we don't have any way to enable from here. But again, I can just do it with set broker desktop group minus enable $true in PowerShell. So let's just make a change here. So let's say I want to automate. I've made a mistake and I want to set, I want to untick that box, for instance. How do I do that in PowerShell? Well, I could try Google and looking around, or DuckDuckGo, or if I really not wanting to find it, I can use Bing. But what we're going to now do is go back to our PowerShell and find the damn thing. There we go, 1926. There you go. Set broker access rule. So ignore the start high level operation, get log site, stop high level. They're all for the logging and the auditing. Again, actually, logging and auditing is something we can get at through PowerShell if we want to. So you can send a weekly report of various types of events if you wanted to, CSV format or whatever else. So that's how we do it. So depending on how you're doing it, you might want to use a bearer token. Or if you're running it as an AD account who is, got the right level of permission via administrators, then, or just use pass-through authentication of that account. Again, there's some notes on that in the slide deck, which I'm definitely not going to get to. So let's stop that screen share. Come back to the slides. I'm always very ambitious in what I'm going to get through. And let's stop the session. Thank you.
Okay, guys.